So Numbers 5 summary. Now remember, Numbers is all about God's ordering them as they're going to get to the promised land. They're going to march in order. But now Numbers 5 is all about the laws of when God told them about unclean things need to be taken out of the camp. This now in Numbers 5 is them having to take away all the unclean people, anyone with leprosy or certain different, discharges or lepers or things were meant to be taken out of the camp. But bear in mind, them being taken out of the camp doesn't mean they're going to be abandoned, not looked after. They just, for God's need for them to understand the need for purity and anything that represents sin, because God dwells with Israel, so he doesn't want to be associated or near anything with sin. So God, with the point of this, was God making them realize he cares about not only their individual sin, but also that sin nature. Now, leprosy is showing that nature of sin that is on them, that they need to deal with that nature of sin and not have it walk in the camp with them, so making outside the camp. Also, in the same chapter, there was laws for if a husband, the spirit of jealousy or that feeling of jealousy comes on a husband and he feels like his wife is cheating on him or has been committed adultery, the process, because in those days, men could have killed their wife for just thinking they'd done something, and jealousy, and find any reason of wrath or jealousy. But God wanted to protect women, as well as it was divine. He was the one to judge them. So they had to go, there was a ceremony, they'd have to go to the priest. She would drink some water, it was called bitter water, and it had some ink, and she would swear an oath and things like that. And then if she was to have being found guilty, then over time it will be revealed, because she wouldn't be able to have children and some disease could have come on her. But if later on she had children, then she was seen to be innocent and she would have had an oath to say all these things as well. And then also in the chapter they had the law of restitution. So it's like anybody that you've wronged or you're guilty against, that you would have to pay restitution. First, you have to confess. Also pay 20% extra of what you've restitution. But if the person had died, then you would give restitution to the priest. Also, there was the law about making sure the offerer, especially for like peace offerings, making sure that, whoever offered the peace offerings, they were due to part of the offering was still theirs, so that it could have fellowship. So all of this is showing that the point of purity, the point of God wanting them to be pure and keeping the family pure and having that mindset of staying away from the sin, dealing with your sinful nature in order to be pure, was in order to have fellowship, so God could be with you, could have fellowship and have a meal with them. So this was the pure point of all this purity. So there's a lot in this chapter, but to summarize, so we've got things like the promised land. Them going to the promised land is about going to the promised land means that the effects of sin and the fall are in some way addressed in your life. So if you try and go to the promised land, you want people to go into the promised land that are addressing the effects and the fall of sin and not walking in the sin nature. And that was the point of having people outside the camp that weren't representing purity and seen as unclean. Then we see also, so summarize, as Israel prepared to march to the promised land, they must separate those considered to be ceremonially unclean. Talked about what God commanded in Leviticus is now had to be done. The ultimate tangible sign of uncleanness in ancient Israel was the corpse. So put outside the camp, leprosy, unclean discharges, and dead bodies were reminders of effects of sin from which Israel must separate as they prepared to march towards the promised land. They had to be organized and ordered by God. Now they would be challenged to become a community that valued purity, was the point. In the midst of which I dwell, God lived in the camp of Israel, so there had to be an effort to separate from sin and its effects. God is concerned with far more than our individual acts of sin. He demands our sin nature be addressed. Promised land people are not sinlessly perfect, but they are not openly, obviously walking the sin nature as illustrated by those outside the camp. Promised land people, we talked about laws and restitution, we talked about including confession and payment of 20%, more and need of harmony as they march to the promised land. We talked about laws of testing a faithful wife. Without doubt, this law saved women. We talked about innocent yet falsely accused, an offering for remembrance, for bringing iniquity to remembrance. This offering was bitter, not sweet, because either a wife could be found guilty of adultery or husband found guilty of unfounded suspicion. And the sacrifice not to be a husband sacrifice. Yeah, so the water that brings a curse will either become bitter. So yeah, a lot going on in this chapter.